So a couple of weeks ago, my grandmother passed away. She was 93, she'd had a long and happy life, and she passed away peacefully in the night. But it was still sad. And it was hard because that was the same weekend that we canceled in-person church for the first time. And everyone was really worried about this virus and saying not to go anywhere, crowded, and there were rumors they were going to shut down the airports. And it just didn't seem possible for me to get there and be with my family, which is normally what you would do after a loss like that. And so that was sad too. Maybe you know how that feels. Maybe you've lost someone you love, or you've really wanted to spend time with someone and you couldn't because other things were going on. That ever happened to you? Well, there's a similar story in the Bible. Jesus had these three friends, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, two sisters and their brother. And Lazarus got sick, and everyone knew he was going to die. And they sent word to Jesus, but Jesus didn't make it in time. And so Lazarus did die. Jesus finally makes it, and he sees the sisters, and as you might imagine, Mary and Martha are very sad. And they talk about how they wish Jesus had been there, and how they knew that if he had been there, he would have been able to heal Lazarus so that he didn't die, and how sad they are. Now here's the thing. Jesus knows how this story is going to end. Jesus is going to raise Lazarus from the dead, bring him back to life. And so you could imagine a world in which Jesus was like, "Don't be sad, watch this. I'm going to make it all better." But that's not what Jesus does. What Jesus does instead is captured in the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. Jesus sees how sad they are, and it makes him sad too, and Jesus starts to cry. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine Jesus crying? So we started off this month talking about this idea of empathy. When we share how people are feeling, when we're happy when they are happy, and when we are sad when they are sad. And there's three things that I want you to remember about empathy from the stories we've looked at. First, part of what empathy means is understanding how someone else feels. So take the story about Jesus being tempted in the wilderness. We see Jesus experiencing hunger, something we all feel, being offered cheap power or success, things many of us desire, and being offered attention and fame for doing something spectacular, again, something that might tempt a lot of us. So while there's more to the story of Jesus being tempted than this, it's partly a story of Jesus experiencing and coming to understand what our lives are like, what things we face as people every day. Second, empathy motivates us to do things to help others. In our first ever video Sunday school, we talked about the story of Jesus feeding thousands of people with a little bit of bread and a couple of small fish. So remember, that story starts with the disciples and Jesus wanting to be alone, and the crowds finding them, which the disciples weren't too happy about. But Jesus has empathy for the crowds, and because of that, he wants to help them instead of sending them away. This year we've been learning about how we follow Jesus in today's world, and this is part of what that means. When we follow Jesus, we have empathy for others. We learn to share their experiences and their feelings, and that motivates us to want to help them however we can. And finally, today's story shows us that God has empathy for us, even when God sees a bigger picture than we do. Mary and Martha are really sad about their brother, and Jesus could have just said, "It's all going to be okay." But he doesn't. He shares their feeling and even sits and cries with them. How did it make you feel to know that God understands our feelings and will even sit and cry with us when we are sad? So if part of following Jesus today is learning to have empathy with others, how do we practice that? One way we can practice is by learning about the experiences and feelings of others through asking questions. Have you ever played the game Jenga? It's the one where you have the tower of blocks and you have to take one out without the tower falling over. So we've got a twist on that game that you can play with your family at home. Thanks to our amazing middle school group teacher, Louise Goodman, for coming up with this. Here's what you do. Before you set up the tower, write numbers from 1 to 30 on the Jenga blocks. You may have more than 30 blocks, and that's fine. Some of them won't have numbers on them, and some of them will. Next, you shuffle all the blocks and build your tower. Now, when you pull out a block, if it has a number, you look at the questions in the document you'll find linked to this video, and you have to answer that question. You can also play this where everyone takes turns answering the question, or where the person who draws the question gets to choose who else at the table answers it. However you play it, take some time to listen to whoever is answering the question and learn a bit more about who they are and how they feel. Hope you enjoy this.